She was a former Marine trapped in a burning apartment building, her legs unable to carry her to safety, clutching her young daughter while smoke filled their lungs. He was a single father and volunteer firefighter haunted by his own losses, driven by an instinct to save others that had never failed him before. What began as a desperate rescue through flames and debris would uncover a connection so profound, so impossible, that when her daughter spoke 3 simple words, it would shatter everything he thought he knew about fate, family, and the tragedy that had defined his life for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Thornbury Heights, a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of Millbrook Valley, where hope came in small doses and dreams were measured in monthly rent payments. In apartment 2B, Aubrey Barnes sat in her wheelchair at the kitchen table, carefully sorting through a stack of medical bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. Her 8-year-old daughter, Chrysia, hummed softly while coloring at the other end of the table, her blonde curls catching the afternoon light streaming through their single window. Aubrey's hands, still steady despite everything she'd endured, moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. 3 years of physical therapy, countless doctor visits, and adaptive equipment had drained most of her veterans' benefits, but she refused to let the weight of financial stress show on her face when Chrysia was around. The little girl had already seen enough struggle for one lifetime. "Mama, can we have spaghetti tonight?" Chrysia asked without looking up from her coloring book, where she was carefully staying within the lines of what appeared to be a family of 3 stick figures holding hands. "Of course, baby," Aubrey replied, though she mentally calculated whether the box of pasta in their cupboard would stretch to tomorrow's lunch as well. "With that sauce you like." The apartment was small but immaculate, everything in its place. Despite the challenges of navigating the narrow hallways in her chair, Aubrey had learned to adapt, just as she'd adapted to everything else since the IED explosion in Afghanistan had taken her ability to walk, but somehow, miraculously, left her ability to hope intact. The walls were decorated with Chrysia's artwork and a single framed photo of Aubrey in her marine dress blues, a reminder of who she'd been before the world had changed in an instant. 15 minutes across town, Miles Harrington stood in the equipment bay of Millbrook Valley Fire Station No. 3, methodically checking the gear that hung in neat rows along the wall. As a volunteer firefighter for the past 7 years, this ritual had become sacred to him, ensuring every piece of equipment was ready, every tool in its place, because in emergencies, seconds could mean the difference between life and death. He understood that truth more intimately than most. At 34, Miles carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen both the worst and best of humanity. His carpenter's hands moved with practiced precision as he tested radio equipment and verified oxygen tank levels. During the day, he ran Harrington Custom Furniture, a small woodworking shop he built from nothing. But 3 evenings a week and every weekend, he belonged to the department. "You don't have to stay late every shift, Miles," called Captain Rodriguez from the office doorway. "Johnson's got the overnight covered." Miles looked up, pushing a strand of dark hair from his eyes. "Just want to make sure everything's ready. You never know when." The alarm pierced the afternoon quiet with its familiar urgency. Both men froze for a split second before training took over. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speakers. "Structure fire. Thornbury Heights Apartments. 847 Oak Ridge Drive. Multiple units requested. Possible occupants trapped." Miles felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as he grabbed his gear, but something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the address he'd driven past those apartments countless times, noting their age and the families with young kids who lived there. Or maybe it was the way the dispatcher's voice had carried, Just a hint of urgency that suggested this wasn't going to be routine. As the fire truck roared through the streets, Miles stared out the window at the smoke column rising in the distance. Black smoke, thick and angry, billowing against the clear blue sky. His mind automatically ran through procedure search patterns, evacuation routes, priority zones, but underneath the professional focus was something else. A pull he couldn't explain, like the smoke was calling to him personally. Back at Thornberry Heights, Aubrey first noticed the smell. Not the usual cooking odors that drifted through the thin walls, but something acrid and wrong. She wheeled quickly to their small living room and felt her blood turn to ice. Smoke was seeping under their front door and through the window. She could see orange flames dancing in the apartment directly below theirs. Chrysia, she called, her Marine training kicking in even as panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Come here right now, baby." The little girl appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide as she registered the smoke in her mother's tone. "Mama, what's happening?" Aubrey's mind raced through options. The elevator would be useless. Never use elevators in a fire. The stairwell might already be compromised. Her apartment was on the second floor, but the drop from their window would be impossible for someone in a wheelchair, especially with a young daughter to protect. She grabbed Chrysia and pulled her onto her lap, wheeling them both toward the window. Below, she could see neighbors evacuating, some still in their work clothes, others clutching pets and precious belongings. The fire department hadn't arrived yet, but she could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. "Listen to me carefully," she told Chrysia, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We're going to be okay, but we need to stay calm and wait for help." But even as she said the words, Aubrey could feel the heat intensifying through the floor. Time was running out, and she was trapped with the most precious thing in her world, unable to save either of them with her own strength. Outside, Miles Harrington was about to arrive at a scene that would change both their lives forever. The fire truck rounded the corner onto Oak Ridge Drive with sirens wailing, and Miles felt his chest tighten at the sight before them. Thornberry Heights was completely engulfed on the first floor, orange flames licking hungrily at the windows while thick black smoke poured from every opening. Residents huddled in scattered groups across the parking lot, some wrapped in blankets, others still in pajamas despite the afternoon hour, all wearing the same expression of shock and displacement. Captain Rodriguez was already barking orders as the truck came to a halt. "Harrington, Johnson primary search, second floor. Martinez, get that ladder truck positioned. We've got reports of a woman and youngster still inside, apartment 2B. Miles grabbed his oxygen mask and axe, his mind shifting into the focused clarity that had served him through dozens of emergencies. But as he looked up at the second-floor windows, something made his blood run cold. In one of the windows he could see movement. A woman in a wheelchair holding what appeared to be a small figure on her lap. Smoke was beginning to curl around the edges of the window frame. "Captain." Miles pointed toward the window. "Visual confirmation, second floor, north side." "Go." "Johnson, back him up." Miles sprinted toward the building, his heavy gear clanking with each step. The front entrance was already compromised. Flames blocked the main stairwell, and the elevator was obviously out of commission. He quickly assessed alternatives. The fire escape on the east side was damaged, twisted metal hanging uselessly. The only viable option was the back stairwell, if it was still passable. He radioed his position and pushed through the rear entrance, finding the back stairs filled with smoke, but not yet blocked by flames. Taking the steps two at a time, Miles reached the second floor and immediately felt the heat intensifying. The hallway was thick with smoke, but his training kicked in as he dropped low and moved efficiently toward apartment 2B. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, Aubrey held Chrysia close as the smoke grew thicker. The little girl was coughing now, and Aubrey had torn strip from her shirt to create makeshift masks for both of them. The heat was becoming unbearable, and she could hear crackling sounds from somewhere below that suggested the fire was spreading rapidly through the buildings. Old wooden framework. "Mama, I'm scared," Chrysia whispered against her shoulder. "I know, baby, but listen, do you hear those sirens? Help is coming. We just need to hold on a little longer." Aubrey's voice was steady, but inside, her mind was calculating odds that she didn't like. The smoke was getting denser, and Chrysia's coughing was getting worse. She wheeled closer to the window and managed to unlatch it, pushing it open to let in fresh air. The crowd below looked up and began pointing, and she could see firefighters positioning equipment. One man in particular caught her attention. He was looking directly up at their window with an intensity that somehow cut through her panic. That man was Miles, who had just emerged from the back stairwell and was assessing the scene. When he saw Aubrey at the window, something twisted in his chest. She was clearly trapped by her wheelchair, but her posture was straight and determined, even in the face of mortal danger. The way she held her daughter protectively reminded him of something he couldn't quite place, something that made his hands shake for just a moment before training took over. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Ma'am," he called up through his radio's external speaker. "Fire department, I'm coming up to get you." He charged toward apartment 2B, using his axe to force open the door when he found it locked. The smoke inside was dense, but he could make out Aubrey's silhouette by the window. As he approached, their eyes met for the first time. "Are you injured?" Miles asked, his voice muffled by his mask, but clear with authority and concern. "I'm paralyzed from the waist down," Aubrey said without shame or self-pity, just fact. "Marine. Veteran. This is my daughter Chrysia. Get her out first." Miles was struck by her composure. No hysteria, no panic, just a soldier's clear assessment of priorities. But he shook his head. "We're all going out together. I'm going to carry you, and you're going to hold on to your daughter. Can you do that?" Aubrey hesitated for just a moment. She hadn't been carried by anyone since her injury, hadn't allowed herself to be that vulnerable. But as she looked at this firefighter, really looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that went beyond professional duty. There was genuine care there, and a determination that matched her own. "Yes," she said simply. Miles carefully lifted Aubrey from her wheelchair, surprised by how light she was, but impressed by her core strength as she positioned herself to hold Chrysia securely. As they moved toward the door, the apartment smoke detector began shrieking, adding to the chaos. "Hold tight," Miles instructed as they navigated the smoke-filled hallway. Despite carrying both of them, he moved with confident efficiency, his years of training evident in every step. The journey down the back stairs felt endless, but finally they emerged into the fresh air of the parking lot. Paramedics immediately surrounded them, checking Chrysia's breathing and Aubrey's vitals, but Miles found himself reluctant to let go. "Thank you," Aubrey said as he gently set her down on the paramedic's gurney. Her dark eyes met his, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade. "I mean it. Thank you for not leaving us." Miles pulled off his helmet, revealing sweat-dampened hair and a face marked by soot but brightened by relief. "Ma'am, leaving you wasn't even a consideration." Something in his tone made Aubrey study his face more carefully. There was loss there, old pain carefully contained, and she recognized it because she carried similar ghosts as the paramedics wheeled her toward the ambulance. Aubrey found herself looking back at the firefighter who had risked his life for strangers. She didn't yet know that Miles Harrington was about to become much more than her rescuer. 3 days after the fire, Miles found himself driving through the unfamiliar neighborhoods of Millbrook Valley's east side, a truck bed full of furniture and a cooler of his sister's homemade meals beside him. He told himself he was just checking on fire victim standard procedure for the department's community outreach program. But the truth was, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about the woman and her daughter since he'd carried them from that burning building. The temporary housing unit that Red Cross had arranged for Aubrey and Chrysia was a far cry from their lost apartment. It was a small furnished efficiency in the Sunset Gardens complex, clean but impersonal, with the kind of furniture that spoke of temporary solutions rather than home. When Miles knocked on the door, he heard Chrysia's voice call out, "Mama, someone's here." Aubrey opened the door in her wheelchair, and Miles was struck again by her composure. Despite having lost everything just 3 days ago, her hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore a simple blue shirt that brought out her eyes. More importantly, there was no trace of self-pity in her expression, just quiet curiosity about why her rescuer was standing on her doorstep. "Mr. Harrington," she said, and he was surprised she remembered his name. "This is unexpected." "Miles, please, and I hope you don't mind I brought a few things." He gestured toward his truck. "The department has a community assistance program, and I thought you might need some basics." What he didn't mention was that most of the items in his truck weren't from the department at all. The small dining table was one he'd crafted himself during slow evenings at his workshop. The comfortable reading chair was one his sister Elena had been trying to donate for months. The wooden toy chest was something he'd made years ago for a customer who never picked it up. Chrysia appeared beside her mother, her blonde curls still showing traces of the previous day's drawing session. There were faint streaks of blue marker on her fingers. "Are you the firefighter who saved us?" she asked with the directness that only 8-year-olds possessed. "I am," Miles said, crouching down to her level. "How are you feeling?" "My throat was scratchy, but it's better now. Mama made honey tea." Chrysia studied his face with serious eyes. "You carried both of us at the same time. That was really strong." Miles chuckled. "Your mama helped by holding on tight." "Mr. Harrington, Miles," Aubrey corrected herself. "You really don't need to." "Actually, I do," Miles interrupted gently. "It's part of our follow-up protocol." The lie came easily, but he softened it with honesty. "And besides, I wanted to make sure you were both okay." Over the next hour, Miles helped arrange the furniture while Aubrey directed from her wheelchair and Chrysia supervised with the serious attention of someone given an important job. As they worked, conversation flowed naturally. Miles learned that Aubrey had been a combat medic before her injury, and that she'd been working part-time doing medical transcription from home. Aubrey discovered that Miles had lost his wife in a car accident 4 years ago, and that he'd become a volunteer firefighter afterward as a way to channel his need to help others. "What's your favorite thing to build?" Chrysia asked Miles as he positioned the toy chest in her small sleeping area. "Probably bookshelves," Miles replied thoughtfully. "I like the idea of making something that holds stories." "Mama reads to me every night," Chrysia announced proudly. "She does different voices for all the characters." Aubrey smiled. "Chrysia's working on reading chapter books by herself. She's quite advanced for her age." As if to prove her point, Chrysia pulled out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web and began reading aloud, her small finger following each word with careful precision. Miles found himself genuinely impressed, not just by her reading level, but by the expression she put into the dialogue. "That's incredible, Chrysia," he said. "You remind me of my nephew. He's a great reader, too. Do you have kids?" Chrysia asked with the curiosity of someone trying to understand the adult world. Miles's expression grew soft and sad for just a moment. "No, but I have a nephew named Anthony who's about your age. He lives with my sister Elena." Aubrey caught the brief shadow that crossed his face and filed it away. She recognized the look of someone who had wanted something desperately and lost the chance. As the afternoon wore on, Miles found excuses to linger. He adjusted the table height to accommodate Aubrey's wheelchair, helped Chrysia organize her few remaining books on the new shelf, and somehow ended up staying for dinner when Elena texted that she was bringing over a casserole. Elena Harrington arrived at 6 sharp, carrying a dish that smelled like heaven and wearing the knowing smile of a woman who had watched her brother carefully avoid emotional connections for 4 years. She was a petite woman in her early 40s, with laugh lines around her eyes, and the confident bearing of someone who ran her own successful accounting firm. "You must be Aubrey," Elena said warmly, extending her hand. "Miles has told me so much about you and Chrysia." "All good things, I hope," Aubrey replied, shaking Elena's hand and immediately liking the woman's straightforward manner. "Well, he did mention that you're tougher than most Marines he's met, and coming from my brother, that's quite a compliment." During dinner, Elena regaled them with stories of Miles as a teenager, including his disastrous attempt to build a treehouse that had resulted in him getting stuck 12 feet off the ground. Chrysia giggled at every embarrassing detail, and even Aubrey found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since the fire. As they prepared to leave, Miles hesitated at the door. "I know this might be forward, but would you like me to help you look for a more permanent place? I know the area pretty well, and I have some connections with landlords who might be flexible about deposits." Aubrey studied his face, looking for any sign of pity or condescension. She found neither. "Why would you do that?" Miles met her gaze steadily. "Because I think you and Chrysia deserve better than temporary, and because helping people find their footing again, that's something I understand." For the first time since her injury, Aubrey felt like someone was offering her partnership rather than charity. "I'd appreciate that," she said quietly. As Miles and Elena drove away, Chrysia pressed her face against the window. "I like him, Mama. He doesn't talk to us like we're broken. Aubrey pulled her daughter close, watching the taillights disappear into the evening. For the first time in years, she was beginning to believe that maybe they weren't. 2 weeks later, Miles found himself sitting across from Aubrey at a small cafe on Maple Street. Apartment listings spread between their coffee cups like pieces of an unsolved puzzle. They had developed an easy routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Miles would stop by after his shift at the furniture shop, and they would spend an hour looking at potential homes while Chrysia did homework at the kitchen table. Today felt different, though. Aubrey seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn, and when she thought he wasn't looking, Miles caught her staring out the window with an expression he recognized too well, the look of someone wrestling with ghosts. "This one has good wheelchair accessibility," Miles said, pointing to a listing for a ground-floor apartment in the Oakwood district. "And it's close to Chrysia's school." Aubrey nodded absently, then set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Miles, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's department policy." "Because I've been a Marine, and I know the difference between duty and choice." Miles felt his carefully maintained composure waver. He had been expecting this question for days, dreading it and craving it in equal measure. "You want the honest answer?" "I always want the honest answer." Miles leaned back in his chair, studying the wood grain of the table as if it held secrets. 4 years ago, my wife Sarah was driving home from her book club. It was raining, and some teenager was texting while driving. He ran a red light and hit her car at full speed. His voice was steady, but Aubrey could see his hands tighten around his coffee cup. She was pregnant. We were going to name the baby Emma if it was a girl, or James if it was a boy. Aubrey's breath caught. "Miles, I'm so sorry. The thing is," Miles continued, not looking up, "nobody could save them. The paramedics tried, the doctors tried, but sometimes trying isn't enough. When I carried you and Chrysia out of that fire, it was the first time in 4 years that my trying actually worked. That I got to save someone who mattered." The weight of his confession settled between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Aubrey reached across the table and placed her hand over his, feeling the calluses and scars that spoke of a man who worked with his hands to build things, to fix things, to make things better. "I understand," she said quietly, "more than you know." Miles looked up then, really looked at her, and saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "What happened to you over there? In Afghanistan?" Aubrey was quiet for so long that Miles began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the controlled tone of someone reciting a report. "I was a Navy corpsman attached to a Marine unit. We were escorting a medical convoy to a remote outpost when our vehicle hit an IED. The explosion killed our driver instantly and trapped me under debris." She paused, gathering strength. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that there was another medic in our convoy, a young Marine named David Chun. He was 22, fresh out of training, eager to prove himself. When the IED went off, his vehicle wasn't hit, but he jumped out to help us." Miles waited, sensing there was more. "David tried to lift the debris off my legs while the area was still hot, meaning there could have been secondary explosives. I kept telling him to wait for EOD, to follow protocol, but he wouldn't listen. He kept saying, 'I can get you out, Doc. Just hold on.'" Aubrey's voice broke slightly. "A second IED went off while he was trying to free me. He died trying to save my legs." Miles felt something twist in his chest. "That's not your fault, isn't it?" Aubrey's eyes flashed. "I was the senior medic. I should have ordered him to stand down. Instead, I let a 22-year-old boy die because I was too proud to accept that sometimes you can't save everyone." "Or," Miles said gently, "you were injured and in shock, and a brave young man made his own choice to try to help someone he respected." Aubrey wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "His mother writes to me sometimes. Sends pictures of what he might have looked like if he'd lived to get married, have children. She doesn't blame me, but I know she should." Miles stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside Aubrey's wheelchair, so they were at eye level. "Listen to me. That Marine David, he made the same choice I made when I ran into that burning building. Not because someone ordered him to, but because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. You don't get to take that choice away from him retroactively." "How do you know?" Aubrey asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I would have done the same thing. Because any decent person would have done the same thing. And because carrying guilt for someone else's courage doesn't honor their memory, it diminishes it." For the first time since her injury, Aubrey felt the rigid self-control she'd maintained for 3 years begin to crack. She leaned forward and let Miles wrap his arms around her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to be held by someone who understood that sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't the physical healing, it's learning to forgive yourself for being the one who lived. They sat like that for several minutes in the quiet cafe, two people who had learned that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the space between survival and guilt. "There's something else," Aubrey said eventually, pulling back but staying close enough that her hand remained on his shoulder. "Something I've never told anyone, not even the counselors at the VA." Miles waited. David had a younger sister. She was 8 years old when he died. Aubrey's voice grew very quiet. Her name was Emma Chun. Miles felt the world tilt slightly. "Emma, the name you were going to give your daughter. When Chrysia told me what you said about wanting to name your baby Emma, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About whether some things happen for reasons we don't understand yet." Miles stared at her, his mind reeling with the impossibility of the coincidence. "You think, I don't know what I think," Aubrey admitted. "But I know that meeting you feels like more than chance. Like maybe David and your Sarah are somehow still looking out for the people they left behind." As they gathered up the apartment listings and prepared to leave, both of them carried the weight of shared loss and the fragile hope that sometimes the universe offers second chances to those who need them most. Neither of them could have imagined that the connections between their pasts ran even deeper than they had just discovered. It was a Saturday afternoon in late November when the truth began to unravel in the most unexpected way. Miles had brought his tools to Aubrey's temporary apartment to install grab bars in the bathroom, a project that had been delayed for weeks due to his work schedule and her stubborn insistence that she could manage fine without them. Chrysia sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, surrounded by a collection of photographs that Aubrey had managed to salvage from their apartment. Most were water-damaged and smoke-stained, but she was carefully cleaning each one with cotton swabs and distilled water, a technique Miles had suggested from his furniture restoration experience. "This one's really damaged," Chrysia said, holding up a photo that was barely recognizable. "But I think it's important to Mama." Miles paused in his measuring and looked over. The photograph was severely water-damaged, but he could make out what appeared to be two figures in military uniforms. "What makes you think it's important?" "Because she looks at it when she thinks I'm sleeping," Chrysia replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom of someone who noticed everything. "And sometimes she cries a little bit." From the bathroom, they could hear Aubrey directing the installation. From her wheelchair, her voice carrying the patient authority of someone accustomed to supervising technical procedures. Miles had learned to appreciate her precision. She never micromanaged, but she also never hesitated to speak up when something wasn't right. "Chrysia, could you bring me that photo cleaning kit?" Aubrey called as Chrysia gathered the supplies. She paused at a small wooden box that had been sitting on the side table since their move. It was one of the few personal items that had survived. The fire completely intact, protected by its solid construction and the fact that it had been stored in Aubrey's bedroom dresser. "Mama, can I look at the things in David's box?" Chrysia asked. Miles froze, his measuring tape suspended in midair. "David's box?" "It's my brother's things," Chrysia said simply, not noticing the way Miles had gone completely still. "Mama keeps his dog tags and some pictures and letters from when he was a Marine." The measuring tape clattered to the floor as Miles stepped out of the bathroom. "Chrysia, what did you just say about my brother David?" "He was Mama's friend in the Marines before he died. Mama said he was the bravest person she ever knew, and that he saved her life even though it cost him his own." Aubrey's voice came from the bathroom, sharp with sudden tension. "Chrysia, don't touch that box without asking first." But Miles was already moving toward the living room, his mind reeling with impossible connections. "Aubrey," he called, his voice strangely hollow, "I need to ask you something." She wheeled out of the bathroom and immediately saw the expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Miles knelt down beside Chrysia, his hands shaking slightly. "Chrysia, sweetie, what's your full name?" "Full name?" "Emma Chrysia Cian Barnes," she replied, looking confused by the adult's sudden intensity. "But everyone calls me Chrysia because there are too many Emmas at school." The world seemed to tilt sideways for Miles. Emma Chun, David Chun's little sister Emma, who would now be exactly Chrysia's age. The Emma he had unknowingly named his unborn daughter after, through a coincidence that suddenly felt like anything but chance. "Your last name is Chun Barnes?" Miles managed to ask. "Chun was my name when I lived with Nai, my grandmother. Barnes is Mama's name. She adopted me after David died, and Nai got too sick to take care of me." Aubrey's face had gone pale. "Miles, I can explain. You adopted David's sister." It wasn't a question. Miles sat heavily on the couch, staring at Chrysia Emma with a mixture of wonder and something approaching devastation. "Emma Chun is sitting right here." Chrysia looked between the two adults, sensing the gravity of something she didn't quite understand. "Why do you look so sad? Are you mad that Mama adopted me?" "No, sweetheart," Miles said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not mad. I'm just surprised." Aubrey's eyes filled with tears. "I should have told you. When you mentioned the name Emma, when you talked about your wife and the baby you lost, I should have explained then." "Why didn't you?" Miles asked, not accusingly, but with the genuine confusion of someone trying to process an impossible revelation. Because how do you tell someone that the name they chose for their unborn daughter is sitting in your living room, alive and real and wonderful? Aubrey's voice broke. How do you tell someone that their dream of having a daughter named Emma came true, just not in the way they expected? Miles looked at Chrysia, again really looked at her. The dark hair that caught light the same way David's had in the military photos he'd seen online when researching the incident. The way she held herself with quiet dignity when discussing serious topics. The advanced reading level and emotional intelligence that spoke of someone who had faced loss early and emerged stronger. You said David died trying to save your legs, Miles said slowly. But he was really trying to save Emma's guardian. After David died, their grandmother was the only family Emma had left. But she was already in her 70s and developing dementia. I visited them during my recovery, and I could see that Emma was basically taking care of herself. Aubrey wiped at her eyes. I had lost the use of my legs, but Emma was about to lose everything. David had died trying to save me, and the least I could do was save the person he loved most. Chrysia moved closer to Miles, her small hand finding his much larger one. Are you the firefighter who carried me and Mama out of the fire? Yes, Miles whispered. Then you saved David's sister twice, she said with simple, devastating clarity. Once when I was Emma, and once when I was Chrysia. Miles felt something break open in his chest, not with pain, but with a feeling so overwhelming he couldn't name it. Here was Emma Chun, alive and brilliant and brave, calling him by both of her names and somehow making sense of connections that defied logic. Don't understand how this is possible, he said, looking from Chrysia to Aubrey. Maybe, Aubrey said softly, understanding isn't the point. Maybe accepting is enough. As the afternoon light faded through the windows, 3 people sat in a room filled with the echoes of impossible coincidences and the weight of a love that had somehow survived death, distance, and the randomness of tragedy to bring them together at exactly the right moment. That evening, after Chrysia had fallen asleep clutching a photo of David in his marine dress blues, Miles and Aubrey sat at the small kitchen table surrounded by documents, photographs, and the contents of David's memorial box. What had started as an attempt to understand their impossible connection had become something deeper. An archaeological dig through the layers of loss and coincidence that had shaped both their lives. Look at this, Aubrey said, her voice barely above a whisper. She held up a letter written in David's careful handwriting, dated just 3 weeks before his death. He wrote to Emma about wanting to learn carpentry after his deployment. Said he wanted to build her a treehouse when he got home. Miles felt his throat tighten. I started learning woodworking after Sarah died. Said I needed to build something with my hands instead of just existing. And here, Aubrey unfolded another document, David's life insurance paperwork. He listed Emma as his primary beneficiary, but look at the contingent beneficiary. Miles leaned closer and felt the world shift again. Listed in David's precise handwriting was a name that made his blood run cold. Sarah Elizabeth Harrington, emergency contact, family friend. That's not possible, Miles said, but even as the words left his mouth, fragments of memory began clicking into place. Sarah mentioning a young Marine she'd been pen pals with. Her involvement with a military support group through their church. The way she'd sometimes grow quiet after receiving letters from overseas. Miles, Aubrey said carefully, what was your wife's maiden name? Morrison. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. He paused, mind racing. But she did volunteer work with military families. She organized care package drives and ... Oh God, he covered his face with his hands. She wrote letters to deployed servicemen who didn't have family support. Aubrey pulled out a shoebox from David's things, one that Chrysia had been too young to understand when they'd packed up David's belongings from his grandmother's house. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Corman Chen in the same flowing handwriting that Miles had seen on grocery lists, and birthday cards for 3 years of marriage. She never told me his name, Miles said, his voice hollow. She said she wanted to protect the privacy of the soldiers she corresponded with. I knew she was writing to someone in Afghanistan, but David wrote about her constantly, Aubrey said, pulling out one of David's journals. Listen to this entry from 2 months before he died. Got another letter from Sarah today. She's pregnant and so excited about becoming a mom. Says she and her husband are going to name the baby Emma if it's a girl, after a student she tutored who reminded her that small acts of kindness can change everything. I told her about my little sister Emma, and she said maybe our Emmas are destined to meet someday. The silence that followed was so profound that they could hear the heating unit cycling on in the next apartment. Miles stared at the journal entry, reading and rereading the words that seemed to mock the very concept of coincidence. Your wife was writing to David about naming their daughter Emma after a student, Aubrey said slowly. And David was writing back about his sister Emma, who you adopted after he died trying to save you, Miles finished. And 4 years later, I rescued both of you from a fire without knowing any of this. Elena's key in the front door interrupted their stunned silence. She entered carrying grocery bags and her usual cheerful energy, which died the moment she saw their faces. What happened? She asked, immediately setting down the bags. You both look like you've seen a ghost. Several ghosts, actually, Miles said. He gestured to the documents spread across the table. Elena, do you remember Sarah's pen pal project? The Marine she was writing to? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. David something. Chinese last name. She was so excited when he wrote that. He had a little sister named Emma said. It was a sign that her baby name choice was meant to be. She paused, looking between Miles and Aubrey. Why? Because, Aubrey said quietly, David was my partner. The one who died trying to save me. And Emma Chun, his little sister, is Chrysia. Elena sank into the remaining chair, her face cycling through disbelief, shock, and something approaching awe. That's not possible. The odds of something like that are ... astronomical, Miles agreed. But here we are. Elena pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. I kept some of Sarah's things in the attic. Her journals, some letters. If David wrote back to her ... She looked up. Would you want to see them? An hour later, they were sitting in Elena's living room reading correspondence between Sarah and David that spanned 8 months of deployment. The letters revealed a friendship built on shared values, mutual encouragement, and a deep understanding of what it meant to love someone you might lose. In Sarah's final letter to David, dated just 1 week before her accident, she had written, I have a feeling that our paths are connected in ways we don't understand yet. Maybe Emma and Emma will meet someday, maybe they won't. But I believe that people who are meant to be in each other's lives always find a way. David's final letter to Sarah, written the day before the IED explosion, contained a single paragraph that left all 3 adults in tears. If something happens to me, please know that your letters gave me hope when I needed it most. You made me believe that good people still exist in the world, and that believing in impossible things sometimes makes them possible. Take care of your Emma, and I promise I'll watch over her from wherever soldiers go when they're done fighting. They knew, Elena whispered. Somehow they both knew their stories were connected. Miles looked through the window toward the apartment where Chrysia Emma slept peacefully, unaware that the adults in her life were slowly piecing together a puzzle that seemed designed by forces beyond their understanding. The question is, he said finally, what do we do with this knowledge? We honor it, Aubrey replied without hesitation. We stop pretending this is all coincidence and start accepting that maybe some connections are stronger than death. As they gathered the letters and photographs, all 3 of them carried the Weight of knowing that they were no longer just individuals healing from loss. They were part of something larger, a story that had been writing itself long before they understood their roles in it. The weight of their discovery proved to be too much to carry gracefully. In the days following the revelation, Miles found himself avoiding Aubrey's calls and canceling their apartment hunting sessions, with excuses about work deadlines and family obligations. The truth was, he couldn't look at Chrysia without feeling like he was staring at a ghost, and he couldn't look at Aubrey without wondering if what he felt for her was real or just an elaborate trick his grieving mind had played on him. "You're running away," Elena said bluntly one evening as Miles sat in her kitchen, mechanically eating the dinner she'd forced upon him. "Sarah would be ashamed of you." "Don't," Miles warned, his fork clattering against his plate. "Don't use her to manipulate me into something I'm not sure I can handle." "Then what are you sure you can handle?" Elena shot back. "Because watching you disappear into your workshop for 16 hours a day isn't healthy processing, it's hiding." Miles pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair. "Do you understand what this means? All of this meeting. Aubrey, rescuing them from the fire, everything I'm feeling for her, none of it is real. It's just some cosmic joke where I'm playing out a script that was written by people who are dead. That's the biggest load of self-pitying nonsense I've ever heard from you," Elena said, standing to face him. "And I've heard some doozies over the past 4 years." Meanwhile, across town, Aubrey was having her own crisis of faith. She sat in her wheelchair on the small balcony of her temporary apartment, watching Chrysia play with neighborhood children in the courtyard below, and questioning every decision she'd made since the fire. Dr. Reginald Webb, her VA counselor, had listened patiently to her account of the discoveries before offering his professional opinion during their emergency session that afternoon. "What you're describing sounds like a textbook case of apophenia," he had said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to talking people down from emotional ledges. "The tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random events. It's common among trauma survivors, especially when they're forming new attachments." "So you think I'm imagining the connections?" Aubrey had asked. "I think you're a woman who has survived tremendous loss and is now facing the possibility of love again. The mind will sometimes create elaborate justifications for taking emotional risks that feel too dangerous to take at face value." Now, as she watched Chrysia laugh with her new friends, Aubrey wondered if Dr. Webb was right. Maybe she had been so desperate for Miles' attention and affection that she had unconsciously constructed a mythology around their meeting. Maybe the letters and documents prove nothing more than the kind of random connections that exist between any two people if you look hard enough. The crisis came to a head when Chrysia finally asked the question that both adults had been dreading. "Why doesn't Miles come over anymore?" she asked during dinner, her voice carrying the particular hurt that only an 8-year-old could convey. "Did I do something wrong?" Aubrey felt her heart break. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why does he look sad when he sees me at the grocery store? Why did he pretend he didn't see us at the library?" Aubrey had no answer that wouldn't require explaining things that Chrysia wasn't ready to understand. The truth was that Miles had been avoiding them for over a week, and the sight of his discomfort whenever their paths crossed accidentally had been devastating for all of them. "Maybe," Chrysia said quietly, "he doesn't want to be my friend anymore. Because I'm not really Emma. Maybe he wanted the other Emma, the one he was going to have with Sarah." The words hit Aubrey like a physical blow. She pulled Chrysia into her lap, holding her tight as the little girl began to cry with the heartbroken confusion of someone who had thought she'd found a new family member only to lose him again. "Listen to me," Aubrey said fiercely. "You are Emma. You've always been Emma. You're also Chrysia, and you're also David's sister, and you're also my daughter. You don't stop being any of those things because one confused adult is scared of loving you." That night, after Chrysia had fallen asleep, Aubrey made a decision. She wheeled herself to her computer and began typing an email to Miles that she revised 17 times before finally hitting send. Miles, I don't know if what we discovered means anything or nothing. I don't know if David and Sarah somehow orchestrated our meeting from beyond, or if we're just three broken people trying to make sense of random tragedy. What I do know is that for the first time in 4 years, my daughter believed she had found someone who could love her, not despite her complicated history, but because of it. What I know is that you looked at us in that burning building and decided we were worth saving, long before you knew any names or connections. What I know is that Chrysia cried herself to sleep tonight, asking what she did wrong to make you disappear. If you've decided that we're too complicated, or that the connections are too intense, or that you can't separate what you feel from what you think you're supposed to feel, I understand. But please don't punish an 8-year-old girl for the cosmic joke of having the same name as your unborn daughter. She deserves better than that from you. We all do. Miles read the email at 3 in the morning, sitting in his workshop surrounded by half-finished projects and the smell of sawdust. By the time he reached the end, his hands were shaking and his eyes were wet. He had been so focused on protecting himself from the overwhelming implications of their connection that he had forgotten the most important truth. Chrysia was a real little girl who needed stability, not another adult who disappeared when things got complicated. He spent the rest of the night in his workshop, but instead of hiding in busy work, he was building something. Something that would require him to face what he'd been running from, and to decide whether he was brave enough to choose love over fear, regardless of what forces might have brought them together. By dawn, Miles had made his choice. The question was whether it was already too late to undo the damage his doubt had caused. Miles arrived at Aubrey's apartment at 7 in the morning, carrying a large canvas bag and looking like he hadn't slept in days. When Aubrey opened the door in her robe, her hair still messy from sleep, he didn't wait for permission to speak. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out before she could fully process his presence. "I'm sorry I ran away. I'm sorry I made Chrysia think she did something wrong. And I'm sorry I almost threw away the best thing that's happened to me in 4 years because I was too scared to believe in something bigger than my own grief." Aubrey blinked, still processing his sudden appearance. "Miles, at 7 a.m., I know. I've been awake all night building something, and I couldn't wait any longer to show you both." He held up the canvas bag. "Is Chrysia awake?" "She's eating cereal and watching cartoons." "Miles, we need to talk about, please," he interrupted, his eyes carrying an intensity she hadn't seen since the night he'd carried them from the fire. "Let me show you what I built first. Let me prove that I'm not running away anymore." Aubrey studied his face for a long moment, then nodded and wheeled back to let him enter. Chrysia looked up from her bowl of cereal when Miles walked into the living room, her expression cautious but hopeful. "Hi," she said quietly, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might make him disappear again. Miles knelt down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Hi, Emma Chrysia Chen Barnes. I owe you an apology." Chrysia set down her spoon, giving him her full attention. "I got scared," Miles continued, his voice gentle but honest. "Not of you, never of you, but of some big feelings that I didn't know how to handle. Sometimes when adults get scared, they do stupid things like avoiding the people they care about most. That's what I did, and it wasn't fair to you. Why were you scared of me?" Chrysia asked, her voice small. Miles looked over at Aubrey, who nodded encouragingly. "Because you have the same name as a baby I lost before she was born. And when I found out about that, I got confused about whether the way I care about you was real or just because of the name." Chrysia considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. "But I'm not that baby, I'm me." "You're absolutely right," Miles said, feeling something loosen in his chest. "You're you, and you're wonderful exactly as you are. The name Emma doesn't make you special, you make the name Emma special. A small smile broke across Chrysia's face. Are you going to disappear again? Not if you'll let me stay. Actually, I was hoping you might help me with something I built last night. He reached for the canvas bag. But first, I need to ask you a very important question. Chrysia nodded solemnly. Would it be okay if I loved you? Not because of your name, not because of who you used to be or who you might remind me of, but just because you're Emma Chrysia Chun Barnes, and you're smart and brave and kind, and you make everyone around you better. Chrysia launched herself into his arms so quickly that Miles nearly fell backward. Yes, she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I was hoping you would. Aubrey felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. As she watched Miles hold her daughter, their daughter, she realized that sometimes the most profound victories weren't about overcoming external obstacles, but about choosing to believe in love despite fear. Now, Miles said, gently extracting himself from Chrysia's embrace, I want to show you both what I spent all night building. He opened the canvas bag and carefully removed what appeared to be a wooden memory box, but far more elaborate than anything Aubrey had ever seen. The lid was carved with intricate detail, two birds in flight, their wings overlapping in a way that suggested both protection and freedom. The wood itself seemed to glow with the kind of finish that spoke of hours of careful attention. It's beautiful, Aubrey breathed, running her fingers along the carved surface. Open it, Miles said. Inside, the box was divided into sections, each one designed to hold specific types of memories. There was a slot for photographs, compartments for letters, a specially cushioned area for David's dog tags, and space for all the other precious items that made up the story of their unconventional family. But what made Aubrey gasp was the inside of the lid. Miles had carved their story in delicate relief: the apartment fire, the rescue, David in his Marine uniform, Sarah with her hands on her pregnant belly, and in the center, three figures holding hands: a woman in a wheelchair, a man with firefighters gear, and a little girl with wings like the birds on the outside. It's us, Chrysia whispered in wonder. All of us. Everyone who belongs to this story, Miles confirmed. The people we lost, the people we found, and the people we chose to become. Aubrey traced the carving of Sarah, noting how Miles had captured not just her likeness from photographs, but a sense of joy and anticipation that spoke of someone who believed in impossible things. You included her. She's part of this, Miles said simply. Just like David is. They don't get erased because we found each other, they get honored. What's this? Chrysia asked, pointing to text carved along the bottom edge of the lid. Miles. Read it aloud. Some connections are stronger than death, deeper than chance, and more powerful than fear. This is the story of how love finds a way. Did you write that? Aubrey asked. Sarah did. It was in one of her last journal entries, the one Elena found in the attic. Miles looked up at Aubrey. She wrote it 2 days before she died, like she somehow knew that her love story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter. For several minutes, they sat in silence, passing David's photos and letters into their designated spots in the memory box. Each item fit perfectly, as if Miles had measured every piece of their shared history and created a home for it. There's one more thing, Miles said when they had finished arranging everything. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. I stopped by the courthouse on my way here. Aubrey unfolded the papers and felt her breath catch. It was a petition for guardianship, filled out in Miles' careful handwriting, requesting legal recognition as Chrysia's guardian alongside Aubrey. You don't have to say yes, Miles said quickly. And this doesn't have to mean anything more than you're comfortable with. But I want it on record that Emma Chrysia Chun Barnes belongs to me too, if she have me. Not as a replacement for anything we lost, but as something new we're building together. Chrysia looked up from the memory box. Does this mean you want to be my dad?" Miles felt his throat close around the word he'd never thought he'd have the chance to say, more than anything in the world. "What about you, Mama?" Chrysia asked, turning to Aubrey. "Do you want Miles to be my dad?" Aubrey looked at Miles, seeing in his face the same combination of hope and terror she felt in her own heart. They were standing at the edge of something that would change all their lives forever, and there was no guarantee it would work. But for the first time since David's death, she was willing to believe that some risks were worth taking. "I think," she said carefully, "that Miles has already been your dad in all the ways that matter. This would just make it official." Then, "Yes," Chrysia said with the decisive authority of someone who had learned early that life was too short for unnecessary hesitation. "Yes, I want Miles to be my dad." Miles pulled both of them into his arms, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. As they held each other in the morning light streaming through the windows, surrounded by the carefully preserved memories of the people who had brought them together, all three of them understood that they had done more than survive their individual tragedies. They had transformed them into something beautiful. "What happens now?" Aubrey asked, her voice soft against Miles' shoulder. "Now," Miles said, looking around the small temporary apartment that had somehow become the birthplace of their new family, "we go house hunting. All three of us this time. Can we get a house with a workshop where you can build things?" Chrysia asked. "And room for a garden," Aubrey added. "I want to try growing something beautiful." Miles smiled, thinking of all the things they would build together, furniture and flowers, traditions and trust, a life that honored both the past that had shaped them and the future they were choosing to create. "We can build anything we want," he said. "We've got all the time in the world." Outside, the November morning was cold and gray, but inside their small apartment, warmth radiated from three people who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that grow from ashes. Courage and the radical decision to believe that love is always worth the risk. 6 months later, the sounds of laughter and power tools filled the air around 412 Sycamore Lane, a modest 2-story house with a wraparound porch and enough land for both a workshop and a garden. Miles stood on a ladder, hanging the swing he'd built for the old oak tree in their backyard, while Chrysia supervised from below with the serious attention of someone who had appointed herself chief safety officer. "A little more to the left, Dad," she called up, using the title that had become as natural as breathing for all of them. "It needs to be perfect for the party tomorrow." Tomorrow marked 1 year since the fire that had brought them together, and they were hosting what had started as a small gathering but had somehow evolved into a neighborhood celebration. Elena had insisted on inviting the entire fire department. Dr. Webb had asked to bring his family after months of hearing about their story during Aubrey's continued counseling sessions. Even Mrs. Rodriguez from Chrysia's school had requested an invitation after witnessing the transformation in her student over the past year. "How's this?" Miles asked, adjusting the swing's position. "Perfect," Chrysia declared, then immediately climbed onto the swing to test it herself. The sight of her dark hair flying in the breeze as she pumped her legs higher and higher never failed to make Miles' chest tighten with gratitude. From the kitchen window, Aubrey watched her husband and daughter with the kind of contentment she'd never imagined possible. The word husband still felt new in her mind, even though they had been legally married for 3 months now. Their wedding had been a small affair in Elena's backyard, with Chrysia as the maid of honor and the entire fire department forming an honor guard with their dress uniforms and crossed axes. The kitchen where she now worked was everything their temporary apartment hadn't been spacious enough for her wheelchair to move freely, with lowered counters and specially designed storage that allowed her to cook elaborate meals without assistance. Tonight's preparation for tomorrow's party had become a labor of love, with 3 different casseroles in the oven and homemade rolls rising on the counter. "Need help?" Miles asked, appearing in the doorway with sawdust in his hair and Chrysia perched on his shoulders. "I've got it under control," Aubrey replied, but her smile was warm. "How's the workshop coming along?" "Come see for yourself," he said, helping Chrysia down. "I finished the last piece this morning." They made their way to what had once been a detached garage and was now Miles' fully equipped woodworking shop. But this wasn't just any workshop. It had been specially designed to accommodate Aubrey's wheelchair, with adjustable work surfaces and tool positioned so she could participate in projects when she wanted to. In the center of the space sat Miles' latest creation, a dining room table crafted from reclaimed wood that had been salvaged from the Thornberry Heights apartments after the fire. The wood had been damaged by smoke and water, but Miles had spent months carefully restoring each piece, incorporating the scars and discoloration into a design that told the story of destruction and renewal. "It's beautiful," Aubrey breathed, running her hands along the smooth surface. The table was large enough to seat 8 comfortably, with subtle carvings along the edges that depicted their journey flames, rescue equipment, military symbols, and small birds like the ones from their memory box. "Look underneath, Mama," Chrysia said, crawling under the table with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a secret. Aubrey maneuvered her wheelchair to see what her daughter was pointing at. Carved into the underside of the table, invisible unless you were looking for it, were 3 names: David Chun, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison Harrington, and Emma Chun, the original Emma, who had become Chrysia but remained forever connected to the sister she'd never been able to save. "They're part of every meal we'll ever share at this table," Miles explained. "Every celebration, every ordinary Tuesday dinner, every homework session, they're with us." "Dad," Chrysia said, emerging from under the table, "can I show Mama the surprise now?" Miles grinned. "I thought you were going to wait until tomorrow." "I can't wait anymore. It's too good." She led them to a corner of the workshop where a large object sat covered by a paint-splattered tarp. With the dramatic flair of someone who had clearly been practicing this moment, Chrysia whipped away the covering to reveal a child-sized workbench, complete with real tools scaled to fit her hands. "Miles," Aubrey gasped, "you didn't have to, actually." "I did," he interrupted. "Elena asked me what I wanted for Father's Day, and I told her I wanted to teach my daughter how to build things. She said that required proper equipment." Chrysia was already examining her tools with the reverence of someone who understood their significance. "Can we build something together right now?" "What did you have in mind?" Miles asked. "A birdhouse," she said without hesitation. "For David and Sarah's birds. I want to hang it where we can see it from the kitchen window, so they know they're always welcome here." As they began working on the birdhouse, Chrysia, measuring boards with intense concentration while Miles guided her use of the saw, Aubrey found herself reflecting on how completely their lives had been transformed. Not just the external changes, though those were significant. The house, Miles' expanded furniture business that now employed 2 other craftsmen. Her own new role as a volunteer coordinator for the Veteran Center that had opened in response to their story, becoming known throughout the community. But the deeper transformation was in how they moved through the world now. Aubrey no longer felt like she was apologizing for taking up space. Her disability had become simply one aspect of who she was, rather than the defining characteristic that overshadowed everything else. She had started speaking at veteran support groups, sharing not just her story of survival, but her story of learning to build a life that honored both loss and hope. Miles had changed too, in ways that went beyond his obvious joy in fatherhood. The haunted quality that had shadowed his eyes for 4 years had been replaced by something lighter but no less deep. He had learned to carry his love for Sarah alongside his love for Aubrey, understanding that the heart's capacity for love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. And Chrysia Emma had blossomed in ways that still amazed the adults who loved her. Her academic performance had always been strong, But now she had the confidence that came from knowing she was completely, unconditionally wanted. She had started a pen pal program at school, writing letters to deployed service members in honor of the correspondence that had connected David and Sarah. Her teacher had described it as remarkable emotional intelligence for someone her age. The doorbell interrupted their woodworking session, and Elena's voice called out from the front of the house. "Hope you're decent. I've got reinforcements for tomorrow's party." They emerged from the workshop to find Elena directing what appeared to be half the fire department in the delivery of tables and chairs for the next day's celebration. Captain Rodriguez waved from the front porch, where he was wrestling with a folding table that seemed determined to remain folded. "Elena," Aubrey laughed, "how many people are coming to this thing?" "Well," Elena said, consulting the list on her phone with the expression of someone who had gotten slightly carried away with party planning, "it started with immediate family and close friends. Then Miles mentioned it to the guys at the station. Then Rodriguez told his wife, who told her book club. Then Dr. Webb asked if he could bring some colleagues who study trauma recovery patterns. Then Chrysia mentioned it at school, ... How many?" Miles asked, looking slightly panicked. 87, Elena replied cheerfully. "But that includes the children." 87? Aubrey repeated weakly. "Don't worry." Captain Rodriguez called from the porch, having finally subdued the folding table. "We called it a department-sponsored community appreciation event. The city's providing the food. You just have to show up and let people celebrate you." "Celebrate us for what?" Miles asked. "For proving that good things still happen," Rodriguez replied simply. "For showing folks that sometimes the worst days of your life are just the setup for the best days. For giving people hope that their own stories might not be over yet." That evening, after the fire department had finished setting up enough tables and chairs to accommodate a small wedding, the three of them sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Chrysia was curled up in Miles' lap, drowsy from a day of excitement and hard work, while Aubrey held the cordless phone she'd been using to check in with the caterers Elena had somehow arranged. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Aubrey asked. Miles considered the question. "A little. It's strange having our story be something people want to celebrate. For so long, it just felt like survival. But it's more than survival now," Chrysia said sleepily. "It's like we took all the broken pieces and built something beautiful." "Where did you learn to say things like that?" Aubrey asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. "From you," Chrysia replied. "And from Dad, and from the stories you tell me about David and Sarah. Everyone I love is really good with words." As if summoned by their conversation, the memory box that usually sat on their living room mantel seemed to pulse with presence. Inside were all the letters, photographs, and mementos that had led them to each other, but also new additions, their wedding photos, Chrysia's first report card with Miles listed as emergency contact, the deed to their house with all three names listed as owners. "Do you think they know?" Miles asked quietly. "David and Sarah, do you think they know how this all turned out?" Before anyone could answer, a pair of cardinals landed on the railing of their porch, bright red against the weathered wood. They sat for a moment, heads tilted as if listening to the conversation, then flew off together toward the oak tree where tomorrow Chrysia's birdhouse would hang. "I think they know," Aubrey said. Watching the birds disappear into the branches. The next morning dawned clear and warm, unseasonably beautiful for late October. By noon, their backyard was filled with people who had come to celebrate, not just their story, but what their story represented, the possibility that love could grow from loss, that families could be built from choice rather than just blood, that sometimes the universe conspired in favor of hope. Captain Rodriguez gave a speech about courage that came in many forms. Dr. Webb talked about the healing power of community and connection. Elena tearfully thanked them for teaching her brother how to be happy again. And Chrysia, standing on a chair so everyone could see her, delivered her own speech that she had written entirely by herself. Some people think family has to happen one way, she said, her clear voice carrying across the gathered crowd. But I know that's not true. Family can happen when a brave firefighter carries you out of a burning building. Family can happen when someone decides to love you even though they're scared. Family can happen when you realize that the people who died still love you enough to help you find the people who are alive. She paused, looking out at all the faces: neighbors, firefighters, teachers, medical professionals, and strangers who had simply heard their story and wanted to witness joy. My dad Miles and my mama Aubrey taught me that love is bigger than being scared, and that sometimes the best families are the ones that grow from ashes. And I want everyone to know that my brother David and my other mama Sarah are still part of our family, even though they live in heaven now. They helped us find each other, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making them proud. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what Miles would remember most was the moment when Chrysia climbed down from her chair and ran directly to him, launching herself into his arms with complete trust that he would catch her. As the party continued around them, neighbors sharing potluck dishes, firefighters demonstrating equipment for fascinated children, Elena organizing group photos with the efficiency of a professional event planner, Miles held his daughter and looked out at their life with wonder. A year ago, he had been a man defined by loss, going through the motions of living while feeling fundamentally disconnected from joy. Now he was a husband, a father, and a man who understood that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with catastrophe. "Dad," Chrysia whispered in his ear, "are you happy?" Miles looked around at their yard full of friends, at Aubrey laughing with Dr. Webb's wife, at the house they had filled with love and memory and hope for the future. He thought of the workshop where he would teach his daughter to build things, of the garden where Aubrey was planning to grow vegetables and flowers, of all the ordinary moments that stretched ahead of them like a gift. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he whispered back. Aubrey maneuvered her wheelchair to see what her daughter was pointing at. Carved into the underside of the table, invisible unless you were looking for it, were 3 names: David Chun, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison Harrington, and Emma Chun, the original Emma, who had become Chrysia but remained forever connected to the sister she'd never been able to save. "They're part of every meal we'll ever share at this table," Miles explained. "Every celebration, every ordinary Tuesday dinner, every homework session, they're with us." "Dad," Chrysia said, emerging from under the table, "can I show Mama the surprise now?" Miles grinned. "I thought you were going to wait until tomorrow." "I can't wait anymore. It's too good." She led them to a corner of the workshop where a large object sat covered by a paint-splattered tarp. With the dramatic flair of someone who had clearly been practicing this moment, Chrysia whipped away the covering to reveal a child-sized workbench, complete with real tools scaled to fit her hands. "Miles," Aubrey gasped, "you didn't have to, actually." "I did," he interrupted. "Elena asked me what I wanted for Father's Day, and I told her I wanted to teach my daughter how to build things. She said that required proper equipment." Chrysia was already examining her tools with the reverence of someone who understood their significance. "Can we build something together right now?" "What did you have in mind?" Miles asked. "A birdhouse," she said without hesitation. "For David and Sarah's birds. I want to hang it where we can see it from the kitchen window, so they know they're always welcome here." As they began working on the birdhouse, Chrysia, measuring boards with intense concentration while Miles guided her use of the saw, Aubrey found herself reflecting on how completely their lives had been transformed. Not just the external changes, though those were significant. The house, Miles' expanded furniture business that now employed 2 other craftsmen, her own new role as a volunteer coordinator for the Veteran Center that had opened in response to their story, becoming known throughout the community. But the deeper transformation was in how they moved through the world now. Aubrey no longer felt like she was apologizing for taking up space. Her disability had become simply one aspect of who she was, rather than the defining characteristic that overshadowed everything else. She had started speaking at veteran support groups, sharing not just her story of survival, but her story of learning to build a life that honored both loss and hope. Miles had changed too, in ways that went beyond his obvious joy in fatherhood. The haunted quality that had shadowed his eyes for 4 years had been replaced by something lighter but no less deep. He had learned to carry his love for Sarah alongside his love for Aubrey, understanding that the heart's capacity for love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. And Chrysia Emma had blossomed in ways that still amazed the adults who loved her. Her academic performance had always been strong, but now she had the confidence that came from knowing she was completely, unconditionally wanted. She had started a pen pal program at school, writing letters to deployed service members in honor of the correspondence that had connected David and Sarah. Her teacher had described it as remarkable emotional intelligence for someone her age. The doorbell interrupted their woodworking session, and Elena's voice called out from the front of the house. "Hope you're decent. I've got reinforcements for tomorrow's party." They emerged from the workshop to find Elena directing what appeared to be half the fire department in the delivery of tables and chairs for the next day's celebration. Captain Rodriguez waved from the front porch, where he was wrestling with a folding table that seemed determined to remain folded. "Elena," Aubrey laughed, "how many people are coming to this thing?" "Well," Elena said, consulting the list on her phone with the expression of someone who had gotten slightly carried away with party planning. "It started with immediate family and close friends. Then Miles mentioned it to the guys at the station. Then Rodriguez told his wife, who told her book club. Then Dr. Webb asked if he could bring some colleagues who study trauma recovery patterns. Then Chrysia mentioned it at school, ... How many?" Miles asked, looking slightly panicked. 87, Elena replied cheerfully. "But that includes the children." 87? Aubrey repeated weakly. "Don't worry." Captain Rodriguez called from the porch, having finally subdued the folding table. "We called it a department-sponsored community appreciation event. The city's providing the food. You just have to show up and let people celebrate you." "Celebrate us for what?" Miles asked. "For proving that good things still happen," Rodriguez replied simply. "For showing folks that sometimes the worst days of your life are just the setup for the best days. For giving people hope that their own stories might not be over yet." That evening, after the fire department had finished setting up enough tables and chairs to accommodate a small wedding, the three of them sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Chrysia was curled up in Miles' lap, drowsy from a day of excitement and hard work, while Aubrey held the cordless phone she'd been using to check in with the caterers Elena had somehow arranged. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Aubrey asked. Miles considered the question. "A little. It's strange having our story be something people want to celebrate. For so long, it just felt like survival. But it's more than survival now," Chrysia said sleepily. "It's like we took all the broken pieces and built something beautiful." "Where did you learn to say things like that?" Aubrey asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. "From you," Chrysia replied. "And from Dad, and from the stories you tell me about David and Sarah. Everyone I love is really good with words." As if summoned by their conversation, the memory box that usually sat on their living room mantel seemed to pulse with presence. Inside were all the letters, photographs, and mementos that had led them to each other, but also new additions, their wedding photos, Chrysia's first report card with Miles listed as emergency contact, the deed to their house with all three names listed as owners. "Do you think they know?" Miles asked quietly. "David and Sarah, do you think they know how this all turned out?" Before anyone could answer, a pair of cardinals landed on the railing of their porch, bright red against the weathered wood. They sat for a moment, heads tilted as if listening to the conversation. then flew off together toward the oak tree where tomorrow Chrysia's birdhouse would hang. "I think they know," Aubrey said. Watching the birds disappear into the branches. The next morning dawned clear and warm, unseasonably beautiful for late October. By noon, their backyard was filled with people who had come to celebrate, not just their story, but what their story represented: the possibility that love could grow from loss, that families could be built from choice rather than just blood, that sometimes the universe conspired in favor of hope. Captain Rodriguez gave a speech about courage that came in many forms. Dr. Webb talked about the healing power of community and connection. Elena tearfully thanked them for teaching her brother how to be happy again. And Chrysia, standing on a chair so everyone could see her, delivered her own speech that she had written entirely by herself. "Some people think family has to happen one way," she said, her clear voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But I know that's not true. Family can happen when a brave firefighter carries you out of a burning building. Family can happen when someone decides to love you even though they're scared. Family can happen when you realize that the people who died still love you enough to help you find the people who are alive." She paused, looking out at all the faces: neighbors, firefighters, teachers, medical professionals, and strangers who had simply heard their story and wanted to witness joy. "My dad Miles and my mama Aubrey taught me that love is bigger than being scared, and that sometimes the best families are the ones that grow from ashes. And I want everyone to know that my brother David and my other mama Sarah are still part of our family, even though they live in heaven now. They helped us find each other, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making them proud." The applause that followed was thunderous, but what Miles would remember most was the moment when Chrysia climbed down from her chair and ran directly to him, launching herself into his arms with complete trust that he would catch her. As the party continued around them, neighbors sharing potluck dishes, firefighters demonstrating equipment for fascinated children, Elena organizing group photos with the efficiency of a professional event planner, Miles held his daughter and looked out at their life with wonder. A year ago, he had been a man defined by loss, going through the motions of living while feeling fundamentally disconnected from joy. Now he was a husband, a father, and a man who understood that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with catastrophe. "Dad," Chrysia whispered in his ear, "are you happy?" Miles looked around at their yard full of friends, at Aubrey laughing with Dr. Webb's wife, at the house they had filled with love and memory and hope for the future. He thought of the workshop where he would teach his daughter to build things, of the garden where Aubrey was planning to grow vegetables and flowers, of all the ordinary moments that stretched ahead of them like a gift. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he whispered back. And as the afternoon light slanted through the oak tree, where two cardinals had built their nest near Chrysia's handmade birdhouse, it seemed to all of them that sometimes the universe really did conspire in favor of love. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of 412 Sycamore Lane, illuminating a scene that had become as natural and essential as breathing. 13-year-old Chrysia sat at the dining table that Miles had crafted from fire-damaged wood, her laptop open as she video-called with Marine Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, the latest pen pal in the program she had started and now managed with the efficiency of someone far beyond her years. "The care package should arrive next Tuesday," she was saying, checking items off a handwritten list. "Mom made her famous chocolate chip cookies, and Dad included one of his hand-carved puzzles. The guys in your unit are going to love trying to solve it." Aubrey watched from the kitchen island where she was preparing breakfast, marveling as she did every morning at how naturally leadership came to her daughter. What had started as a simple elementary school pen pal project had evolved into the David and Sarah Connection Program, a non-profit organization that paired deployed service members with local families for ongoing support and correspondence. The program now served over 200 military families across 3 states. But Chrysia still personally managed the correspondence for a dozen service members, treating each letter with the same care she had once given to her coloring books. "Make sure to tell your sergeant about the winter care drive," Chrysia continued. "We're collecting warm socks and hand warmers for the whole unit." Miles appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair now showing distinguished streaks of silver, and his carpenter's hands bearing the accumulated scars of 8 years building custom furniture for families throughout Millbrook Valley and beyond. His business, Harrington and Associates Custom Woodworking, employed 6 craftsmen and had a waiting list that stretched 6 months into the future. But he still insisted on personally crafting pieces for military families and fire department fundraisers. "Morning, sunshine," he said, kissing the top of Chrysia's head as she finished her video call. "Don't forget you have that interview with the high school newspaper today." Chrysia groaned dramatically. "Do I have to?" "They're just going to ask the same questions everyone asks about growing up in a miraculous family." "The miraculous part," Aubrey said, bringing plates of eggs and toast to the table, "is not that we found each other. It's what we chose to do with the second chance we were given." This conversation had become a familiar one in their household. As Chrysia had grown older and their story had spread throughout the community and beyond, she had sometimes struggled with the attention that came with being the girl from the fire rescue story. But both Miles and Aubrey had worked to help her understand that their visibility came with responsibility, the opportunity to show other families that healing was possible, that love could grow from loss, that chosen families could be just as strong as biological ones. "Besides," Miles added, settling into his chair, "this interview is about the scholarship program, not about us." The scholarship program was Chrysia's latest initiative, a fund that provided educational support for children who had lost military parents. It had started when she learned that David Chun had been saving money to pay for college for a younger cousin who had dreamed of becoming an engineer. With Elena's help managing the finances and Dr. Webb providing psychological evaluation criteria, they had created a program that now supported 12 young people in pursuing higher education. "I know," Chrysia said, spearing a bite of eggs. "I just wish people understood that we're not special because sad things happen to us. We're just a regular family who figured out how to be happy." Aubrey and Miles exchanged a look across the table, the kind of silent communication that had developed between them over 5 years of marriage and 8 years of shared parenting. They had long since learned that Chrysia's wisdom often exceeded her chronological age, a gift that had emerged from navigating loss early, but being surrounded by adults who refused to let trauma define her future. After breakfast, as they prepared for their respective days, Miles noticed Aubrey sitting quietly in her wheelchair by the living room window, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. He followed her line of sight and saw what had captured her attention, a young woman in army fatigues walking slowly down their street, a large duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a slight limp in her gait. "New neighbor?" Miles asked. "Maybe," Aubrey replied, but something in her tone suggested she was thinking deeper thoughts. "Or maybe someone who needs to know that there's a place where people understand." It had become a pattern over the years. Somehow, their house had become an unofficial stopping point for veterans and military families who were struggling with transitions, injuries, or loss. It wasn't something they had planned or advertised. Words simply spread through VA networks and military communities that 412 Sycamore Lane was a place where people understood what it meant to rebuild a life from pieces. Some visitors stayed for a cup of coffee and a conversation. Others became long-term friends and support network members. A few had even relocated to Millbrook Valley, drawn by the community that had grown around the idea that healing happened best when it happened together. "I'll make extra coffee," Miles said, understanding without words what Aubrey was thinking. As if summoned by their conversation, the young woman in fatigues paused at their front gate, looking up at the house with an expression of uncertainty mixed with hope. Aubrey wheeled to the front door and opened it before the woman could decide whether to knock. "Good morning," Aubrey called gently. "I'm Aubrey Harrington. Are you looking for someone?" The woman's posture straightened, slightly military bearing. That would probably never completely leave her. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Genevieve Sterling, I heard." "That is, someone at the VA said that you might understand." "About what?" Aubrey asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "About coming home different than you left," Genevieve said simply. 20 minutes later, Sergeant Sterling sat at their kitchen table with a cup of Miles' coffee and a plate of Aubrey's leftover cookies, telling them about the IED explosion that had taken her right leg below the knee and left her struggling to navigate civilian life with a prosthetic. But more than the physical challenges, she was wrestling with the guilt of being the only survivor from her unit's vehicle. "Everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful to be alive," Genevieve said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been trying to feel grateful when all she felt was lost. "And I am, but But gratitude and grief can exist in the same space," Aubrey finished. "And sometimes the people who love you most say the things that hurt the most, because they don't know how to carry your pain with you." Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, exactly that." Miles refilled her coffee cup and sat down across from her. "How long have you been home?" 6 months. "I've been staying with my sister in Springfield, but..." Genevieve gestured helplessly. "I love her, but she keeps trying to fix me. She thinks if she just finds the right therapist or the right activity or the right medication, I'll go back to being who I was before." "But you can't go back," Chrysia said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with her backpack ready for school. "You can only go forward, and forward has to include all the parts of you, even the broken ones." Genevieve stared at the 13-year-old who had just articulated something she hadn't been able to express in months of counseling sessions. "This is our daughter Emma Chrysia," Aubrey said. "She's somewhat of an expert on becoming yourself when you can't be who you used to be." "Are you a veteran too?" Genevieve asked. "No," Chrysia replied. "But I'm the sister of a Marine who died saving my mom, and the daughter of a firefighter who lost his first family, and sometimes being connected to heroes means you have to figure out how to carry their love without being crushed by their loss." As Chrysia headed off to catch her school bus, Genevieve watched her go with an expression of wonder. How is she so wise? "Practice," Miles replied, "and really good role models. Her brother David and my first wife Sarah taught all of us that love doesn't end when life does." They spent the next 2 hours talking about prosthetics and phantom pain, about survivor guilt and civilian disconnect, about the particular challenge of rebuilding identity when the external markers of who you used to be no longer applied. By the time Aubrey had to leave for her shift at the Veterans Resource Center, and Miles needed to get to his workshop, Genevieve looked lighter somehow. "Would you like to come back tomorrow?" Aubrey asked as they walked Genevieve to the front gate. "We usually have dinner together on Fridays. Nothing fancy, just family." "I'd like that," Genevieve said. "But I should warn you, I'm not very good at family dinners these days. I tend to get overwhelmed in groups." "Then we'll keep it small," Miles said. "Just us, Elena, my sister, and maybe Dr. Webb if he's free. He's Aubrey's counselor, but he's also become a friend who's really good at listening." That evening, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset, Aubrey reflected on how many times the scene had played out over the years. Different faces, different stories, but the same fundamental truth. People needed to know they weren't alone in their struggles to rebuild. "Do you think we're doing enough?" she asked Miles, who was reading through portfolio submissions for the scholarship program. "What do you mean? All these people who find their way to us." "Genevieve, the Garcias last month, that Navy pilot who stayed for 3 weeks in the spring. Are we really helping them, or are we just making ourselves feel better about our own survival?" Miles set down the portfolios and turned to face her fully. Do you remember what Dr. Webb told us during our first counseling session about how healing works? Aubrey nodded. Dr. Webb had explained that recovery from trauma wasn't a destination, but a practice, something you did every day, not something you completed and moved on from. He said that the people who heal best are the ones who figure out how to use their experience to help others heal, Miles continued. Not because it erases what happened to them, but because it gives meaning to what they survived. But what if we're creating dependency? What if people start thinking we're some kind of miracle cure instead of just ... US? Then Chrysia will probably tell them the truth, Miles replied with a smile. That we're not miracles, we're just people who learned how to choose love over fear, and that anyone can learn how to do that. As if summoned by their conversation, Chrysia appeared at the front door, homework finished and ready for their evening family time. At 13, she had grown tall and lanky, with her biological father David's dark eyes and quick smile. But her personality was entirely her own, confident without being cocky, compassionate without being naive, wise without being cynical. How was the newspaper interview? Aubrey asked as Chrysia settled onto the porch swing that Miles had rebuilt twice as she'd grown. Good, I think. They wanted to know about the scholarship program, but they also asked if I ever wished my life had been different. If I ever wished David hadn't died, or that you hadn't been injured, or that Dad's first family hadn't been killed. Miles and Aubrey waited, recognizing the tone that meant Chrysia was working through something important. I told them that wishing for different doesn't make sense, because different would mean I wouldn't be who I am, and I like who I am. I told them that the people we lost didn't die so we could be happy, they died because bad things happen. But we chose to be happy anyway, and I think that would make them proud. What else did you tell them? Miles asked. That our family isn't a tragedy with a happy ending. It's a happy story that started with tragedy, and there's a difference. Chrysia paused, swinging gently in the evening breeze. And I told them that if people want to call us miraculous, that's fine, but the real miracle isn't that we found each other. It's that we keep choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by the bonds they had chosen to forge and strengthen over 8 years of shared life. From their memory box inside the house, the presence of David and Sarah seemed to radiate warmth and approval. Their love story hadn't ended with death, it had simply transformed, becoming the foundation for new love, new family, new hope. In the oak tree above them, the descendants of the cardinals who had first appeared during their anniversary celebration fluttered among the branches, their songs mixing with the evening breeze to create a symphony of continuance and peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Genevieve's healing journey, scholarship applications to review, furniture orders to fill, letters to write to deployed service members. But tonight, there was only this, a family created from loss and choice, sitting together on their front porch, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love well shared. I love our story, Chrysia said softly, her voice carrying the cross. The porch like a prayer. So do I, Aubrey replied, reaching for Miles' hand. So do I, Miles echoed, understanding that their story was far from over. It was still being written. One day of chosen love at a time. And in the gentle evening air of Millbrook Valley, it felt to all of them like David and Sarah were smiling, knowing that their love had become something eternal, something that would continue to grow and spread and heal for generations to come. 15 years after the fire that changed everything. Emma Chrysia Chun Barnes Harrington stood at the podium of the Millbrook Valley Community Center, looking out at an audience of over 300 people who had gathered for the 10th annual From Ashes to Hope conference. At 23, she had grown into a woman who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had always known she was loved, but also with the purposeful determination of someone who understood that privilege came with responsibility. 10. Years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, my parents started what they thought would be a small support group for veterans and their families. They had no idea they were planting seeds for something that would grow into a movement that now spans 12 states and serves over 2,000 families annually. In the front row, Miles and Aubrey sat hand in hand, their hair now more silver than brown, their faces bearing the lines that came from decades of laughter and tears, shared in equal measure. At 51 and 49 respectively, they had learned to wear their age as gracefully as they wore their love openly, proudly, and with the understanding that every year together was a gift they had once thought impossible. Behind them sat Elena, now a grandmother herself, next to Dr. Webb, who had officially retired from the VA but continued to volunteer with their organization. Captain Rodriguez, long since promoted to fire chief, occupied an entire row with current and former firefighters who had become family over the years. And scattered throughout the audience were faces that told the story of their expanded mission veterans and their families, fire department personnel, community leaders, and the dozens of young people who had received scholarships through the David Chun and Sarah Morrison Harrington Educational Foundation. But today, Krizia continued, I'm not here to talk about statistics or success stories, though we have plenty of both. I'm here to tell you about something that happened last month that reminded me why this work matters on a level that goes beyond programs and policies. She paused, her gaze finding her parents in the front row, and Miles saw in her expression the same thoughtful intensity that had characterized her since childhood. 3 weeks ago, I was finishing my shift at the regional VA hospital where I work as a trauma counselor, when the emergency department called to say they had a situation that might benefit from our family support program. A house fire in the Riverside district had claimed one life and left a single father with severe burns, trying to care for his 6-year-old daughter, who had been unharmed physically but was not speaking. The audience had grown completely still. Even those who didn't know the Harrington family's origin story could sense the significance of what they were hearing. The father's name was Anthony Rogers. He had lost his wife in the fire while trying to save her and their daughter. The little girl's name was Sarah Chin, no relation to our Sarah or our David. Just one of those coincidences that would have felt impossible if I hadn't learned growing up that impossible things happen all the time. Aubrey felt Miles squeeze her hand tighter. They had heard this story before, of course, but hearing Krizia tell it publicly for the first time was different. It was watching their daughter step fully into her role as a bridge between past and future, between loss and hope. When I met Anthony in the hospital, Krizia continued, he was sitting beside his daughter's bed, holding her hand while she stared at the ceiling and refused to speak to anyone. The doctor said there was nothing physically wrong with her. She was simply traumatized into silence. Anthony looked at me with the kind of desperation I recognized, and he said, everyone keeps telling me she'll be okay, but I don't know how to help her when I can barely breathe myself. I told him about my family, about the fire that brought my parents together, about my brother David who died trying to save my mama, about my other mama Sarah who died wanting to love a daughter named Emma. I told him about learning to carry love for people who were gone, while building love for people who were here. And do you know what he said to me? The audience waited in complete silence. He said, you mean there's a way to survive this that doesn't require forgetting them? And I realized that was the question my parents had been answering for 23 years, not just for me, but for everyone who had found their way to our family. Krizia stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the audience with the natural ease of someone who had grown up in rooms full of people sharing their deepest truths. Anthony and Sarah have been living with us for the past 3 weeks. Not permanently. Anthony has family in Colorado who are helping him rebuild his life, but long enough for Sarah to start speaking again, and for Anthony to understand that grief doesn't have to be carried alone. Last night, as we were all sitting at our front porch, the same porch where I grew up learning about love from 4 parents instead of 2. Sarah looked up at my dad and asked him a question that took all of us back to the beginning of our own story. Miles felt his throat tighten, knowing what was coming. She asked him, "Why did you decide to save people you didn't even know?" And Dad gave her the same answer he gave me when I asked him that question 15 years ago. Because everyone deserves to be saved, and sometimes we're the ones who get to do the saving. But then Sarah asked a follow-up question that none of us were expecting. She said, "Will you teach me how to save people too?" And that's when I understood that this work, this mission, this family we've built, it's not just about healing from the past. It's about teaching the next generation that they have the power to create healing for others. Chrysia returned to the podium, her voice taking on the strong, clear tone that had become her signature when speaking about their mission. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Young Heroes Initiative, a program designed to teach children and teenagers how to recognize and respond to trauma in their communities. Not as professional counselors or emergency responders, but as compassionate human beings who understand that small acts of kindness can change everything. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, but Chrysia held up her hand to continue. More importantly, I want to tell you what happened yesterday, because it shows you who we really are as a family and as a community. Yesterday was the anniversary of the fire that killed Anthony's wife, Lisa. He had been dreading it for weeks, certain that the grief would overwhelm him and Sarah again. But when he woke up yesterday morning, he found that Sarah had spent the early hours making breakfast for our entire household, pancakes shaped like hearts, because she said that's what her mama used to make on special days. And when Anthony started crying at the breakfast table, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that his daughter was not only healing but helping others heal, Sarah climbed into his lap and said something that reminded all of us why we do this work. Miles leaned forward, remembering the moment that had brought him to tears just 24 hours earlier. She said, "Daddy, I think Mama sent us to these people because they know how to love kids whose mamas are in heaven. And now we can help other kids whose mamas and daddies are in heaven too." The silence in the auditorium was profound, the kind that comes when an entire room of people is processing a truth that cuts straight to the heart of human experience. 6-year-old Sarah Chun Rogers has decided that her purpose in life is to help other children who have lost parents. Anthony has decided to train as a peer counselor for burn survivors. And they have both decided that our family is their family. Now, not because they need us to replace what they lost, but because they understand that love multiplies when it's shared. Chrysia paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar over years of conferences, support groups, and community gatherings. In 2 weeks, I will graduate with my master's degree in trauma counseling. I will officially become Dr. Emma Chrysia Chun Barnes Harrington, and I will spend my career doing the work that my 4 parents, David, Sarah, Mama, and Dad, taught me to do, helping people understand that their worst days don't have to define their futures. But today, I want to leave you with the truth that has guided our family for over 2 decades. Love is not diminished by loss, it is multiplied by courage. Family is not defined by blood, it is defined by choice. And healing is not about forgetting the past, it is about using the past to build a future that honors everyone you've loved. As Chrysia concluded her speech, the standing ovation that followed seemed to lift the roof of the community center. People were crying, hugging, and many were already making plans to volunteer for the new Young Heroes Initiative. But in the front row, Miles and Aubrey were focused entirely on their daughter, the little girl they had saved from a fire, who had grown into a woman dedicated to pulling others from the flames of their own tragedies. After the conference, as they drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook Valley, the 3 of them sat in comfortable silence until they reached the house on Sycamore Lane that had become a landmark in their community, a place where people knew they could find hope when they had run out of it elsewhere. Are you nervous about graduation? Aubrey asked as they pulled into their driveway. No, Chrysia replied. I'm excited. Dr. Webb says the VA has offered me a position heading up the new family trauma unit, and I think I'm ready for it. What about Anthony and Sarah? Miles asked. Have you talked to them about what happens when they move to Colorado? Chrysia smiled. Anthony asked me if we do video calls for long-distance family members. I told him we've been doing them for years. Elena's grandkids in Oregon never miss our Sunday dinners. As they walked up the front path, past the garden that Aubrey had filled with flowers in memory of every person they had lost and vegetables to feed every person they had found, Miles reflected on the strange mathematics of their life. They had started as three broken people trying to heal from individual tragedies, and had somehow become the center of a community that stretched across the country. That evening, as was their tradition, they sat on the front porch as the sun set, this time joined by Anthony and little Sarah, who had spent the afternoon helping Miles build a new birdhouse for the oak tree. Will you tell me the story again? Sarah asked, settling into Aubrey's lap with the trust of someone who had learned that safety could be found in unexpected places. Which story? Aubrey asked, though she already knew. About how love finds a way, Sarah replied. And so, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Aubrey began the story that had become their family's origin myth, the story of a fire that had burned away everything they thought they knew about their lives, only to reveal the foundation for everything they were meant to become. Once upon a time, she began, her voice carrying across the porch and into the evening air, there were two people who thought their stories were over, but they were wrong. Their stories were just beginning, and the beginning looked like ashes. And courage, and the radical decision to believe that love is always worth the risk. As she spoke, Miles watched the cardinals that had made their home in the oak tree for 15 years, and he thought about the mystery of continuation, how love persisted through death, how families grew from loss, how hope could be planted in the darkest soil and somehow still bloomed out in their memory box inside the house, surrounded by 15 years of accumulated treasures. The original letters from David and Sarah seemed to pulse with satisfaction. Their love story had become larger than they could have ever imagined, touching hundreds of lives and creating ripples of healing that would continue long after everyone who remembered their names had joined them in whatever place souls went to watch over the people they loved. And on Sycamore Lane, in a house that had become a beacon for anyone who needed to believe in second chances, 5 people sat together on a front porch, sharing the story of how love finds a way, always finds a way to write itself into the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from US.